So we're going to have a recap on settings, and then we'll move on to the details that we looked at in class last week. So I'll just try to catch up with some of these videos. So there's a suspended ceiling I've put in. That's put in as a sketch-based system. It won't go in automatically because it's not bounded on this face. Even though there's a curtain wall there, it's not classed as a wall. So I'll just show you that in a second. So I have put walls around that that enclosure to make the section cut and the detailing look a little bit more realistic. So we'll do that, but first up we'll look at some of the settings options that we've got. So as I mentioned before, there's the VV or VG. So if I type in VG, visibility graphics overrides. So these are the by view overrides. So what I mean by that is anything I change or turn on or turn off in this environment only happens in this view, so other views wouldn't be affected by that. What I could do in this view would be to create a template of the settings that I'd set and then apply that to different views. So this is the visibility graphics override, and that's only affecting things within this view. So let's cancel that out a second. There's another thing that we've also got that affects the objects in a view only override, and that's the right click option. So if I was to click on this floor and right click it, then override graphics in view, and we've got element, category, or by filter. Now the element, if I affected the overrides to an element, it's just that selected floor. If I went by category, it would be all floors. So I'll use the by category option here, and then I've got this dialog box which allows me to look at the projection lines. So if I just go to the second floor, I can't do that, I have to cancel out of this. So I'll just go to the second floor first, and I'll right click again and override graphics in view by category. And we'll look at projection lines first. So these are the lines that are projected, not the cut ones, but the projected lines. And the weight, everything is by object style, so we'll point that out in a second. The pattern is also by object style. So we can override these by clicking on these boxes, and whatever the object style is, there's 1 to 16. So 16 different line weights in total. So I went to line weight 10 and just applied that for the moment and change the color to red, so we can kind of highlight and apply that, so we can just see what's going on this edge. Now nothing's showing up at the moment because we've got our thin lines toggled on. So if I just change the pattern as well, so we can get a full idea of what's going on. So I'll choose a dashed line and then say OK to that. Then we can just see that the edge of the floor has now got a dashed red line. If I turn this off, then we get a much better idea of what's going on. So that's overridden the boundary line of that floor, the projection line, the way that it projects off the edge of the floor. So any other cuts and holes in there would have this line type. If I go to the 3D, then we don't see it because it's a different view. And if I went to my level 1, we don't see it because that's a different view. So it's only going to be inside of level 2. Okay, so if I was to wanted to change this back, then I can select my floor, right click, override graphics in view, and by category, and then reset to the original values, and then OK that. Then these go back to the original values. If I wanted to make a change that was global and so affected every view, then I have to go into the object styles. So where are the object styles? So most of the settings that you need to adjust are on this Manage tab. Okay, so Materials, Object Styles, Snaps, and then this one here, Additional Settings, that covers nearly everything else. We've got lots of different bits and pieces here, shared parameters, project standards, purging, etc. But we're not going to sort of have time to go into all those things. But we'll look at some of the main things, like line styles and line weights, line patterns, the difference between some of these things. But first up, we'll look at the object styles. So just close that down and select Object Styles. Now this is the global change. So if I went to the category of the model, not the annotation objects, we'll look at those maybe later, but this one, we just use the turn off mechanical, piping and electrical there. So we've got floors. Okay, projection line weight is set to 1, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. So floors, again, I'll change that to 10. And the cut line weight is 4, that's okay. We'll change the line color to red. Okay, and then we'll change the line pattern to that dash line. So this is now making global changes, and then I'll say apply, and there you see it. Okay, so this is in level 2. Level 1 has the same thing. In fact, you can see all the floor lines, and in 3D we also get to see those changes manifest across the board. So that's because they are global changes made on the object styles. Now, there's no reset function on this, so you have to kind of remember what they were. So back to 1 for that. That was 4. Back to black. That was not back in black, back to black. So that'll be that, and solid line for the outside edge. And then OK that. So that's reset it to the way that it was. So just pop over to my section. I'll close my ceiling plan, and so right click on this, go to view, and we can see we've also got the section cut. Now I find that this dashed line is a little bit too loose really for these details. I mean, you change the scale to maybe 1:25, it's going to tighten up a bit, but you probably would have this at 1:50 possibly. So we'll just see how we can change that. Now again, I want this to be a global change. So, and the object styles, I now look at my annotation objects, because it's not model object, it's an annotation object. And we come down to call out boundary, and we've got this loose dash. I don't know whether that was the original one, because I've been changing these a little bit. But if I went to dash number 2, that one, I know that's a much tighter dash line. So that will be fine. I don't want the leader line to be affected. That's solid, so that's okay in black. And the line thickness is okay as well for these things. So I can apply that and okay that. So I've now got a much tighter sort of dash line around these things. So personally, I think it's just a better looking finish. And again, if you really did want to sort of highlight it a little bit more, then you could put a slightly thicker line type in. Which leads me to the next bit, which is what do those line type numbers mean? So on additional settings, or line weight numbers should I say, we'll go to line weights, and this is what we get. So I'll just drag this dialog box out so we can see it a bit more and drag it down a bit. So we've got 16 options, and we can't have any more than 16. 16 is more than enough. Normally 3 or 4 would be more than sufficient for a drawing. The add bit doesn't mean so we can add 17, 18, 19. It means that we add scales. So at 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 50. So if I wanted to set a scale at 1 to 5, click on add, and we'll go down to say 1 to 5, and then say OK to that. And then that adds a column at 1 to 5, and you can start adjusting these sorts of things. Just bear in mind that number 1 and number 2 are given to quite a lot of lines. So if you decided maybe that you wanted to use a really thin line for something, then you're better off changing the higher end ones. And so say at 1 to 100, I wanted a line thickness at 0.05, for example, for some, not hatching, because hatching is not controlled by these line widths, that's controlled by the pattern itself. And I don't think you can change that unless you create your own very thin line type hatches. But I might be proved wrong on that. Millimeters there. And apply that. So we've now got a nice thin line type for the 16. So for anything that was particularly thin, then it might be going against the grain a bit, but at least you know that very few objects are affected by this line thickness. If you do start changing these things, then that's going to affect an awful lot of lines within the project. You've also got perspective line weights and annotation line weights. Again, so that's the thinnest line that goes down to is 0.1. So again, you might want to consider sort of dropping that down a little bit, but unless you've got access to sort of a laser printer, then you're going to lose some of the line thickness. If it's plotting, then they're not going to make much difference. So we can say OK to that. So if we now have a look at line styles, so line styles is a combination of the line weight, the line color, and the line pattern. So it's three things make up a line style. Now these ones which have little brackets around them, these are assigned to system objects. Okay, so these are in families and are sort of allocated already. You can't delete or rename any of these things, even these ones down here which are given in. You can't delete or rename those. The only thing I could do is create a new one, and so I'll call that my new style, and it's a subcategory of lines because that's the only thing we've got a subcategory of, and OK that. And this one, then I'm free to rename or delete as I see fit, because this is something I've created myself. The rest of them are in the template and can't be deleted. These things, say with the brackets in, these are associated with families, etc. So they're hardwired into the system, whereas these aren't, but they still can't be deleted. So my new line style, let's give it a bit of gravitas. So we'll give it a nice line thickness of 6. And again, we'll have a nice bright color so we can see the changes, and solid. We'll have a dashed line there. So I'll just apply that. And OK. So my new line style has now been loaded into the system. Say I wanted to just go in and sort of change a few line options. So instead of having, it's kind of overriding it, but you're using a different tool. It's on the modify panel. It's this thing here. So line work. So I can click on that and say I wanted just to override certain things. I can then use my new line style, which is this thing here, and come in and just pick on these things, and it just allows me to override these particular ones. So I'm not overriding specifically by category or element. I'm just going in and picking on lines that I want to have this line style done. Okay, so I'm going to use medium lines for some of these elements, wide lines for other ones. So again, it just allows you to sort of smarten up or change the look of something. And this is again a per view type thing. It doesn't affect these things here. If I wanted to change, for example, the outline of this thing, it's not up for grabs in this option. I have to do it within the object styles or the override in view options by element. Okay, so I could have to go in and change the weight that way around. So lots of different things that you can consider with your settings. We haven't quite finished yet, so if we go back to our Manage tab, so if I click on Fill Patterns, this is a list of the different types of fill patterns we have. We've got drafting and we have model. The difference between a drafting pattern and a model pattern is that this will change the scale. Okay, so as we change the scale, then these patterns get tighter or looser. If I've got an example here, I will show you. So I'll just cancel that. So we'll look at this. This is a drafting hatch pattern. So if I change from 1 to 50 to 1 to 20, for example, this all tightens up. And the reason it does this is that different hatch patterns at different scales on the same sheet would all render out the same sort of spacing. So it's very useful we get this. It's the annotation sort of style in AutoCAD, automatically generated within Revit, so that makes it quite easy to use. However, if I went to my 3D view, we get a fixed sort of brick size, and let's just pan down to that. So if I change the scale from 1 to 50 to 1 to 20, for example, the brick size hatch doesn't change. Okay, everything gets a little bit sort of fainter, but it doesn't affect the look of it, even down to 1 to 5 or 1 to 1. So that's what the difference between a model-based pattern and a drafting pattern. Okay, so if we go back now to additional settings and look at the fill patterns, you will see that these are more like your section cut hatches. So sand, dents, line work, etc., earth, wood finish, and the model ones tend to be sort of roof patterns, floor patterns, brickwork patterns, stone patterns, etc. Okay, so these are going to be fixed and these are going to change. So to edit some of these things, let's look at the ANSI 133, for example. Let's just edit that and see what sort of things we get. The scale is set, that's the sort of size. The line thickness is set as well. We can't seem to change that. I could import a different hatch pattern to that if I clicked on the import button. So it's looking for file types of this thing, sort of .pat. I guess that's a pattern file. It's made up of some graphic and some other sort of settings. So I'll cancel out that. So load up a new pattern file, and I suppose you set your scale as well. So we've got the simple option and the custom option. So for the simple option, we would have to change the name because that's no longer ANSI 33. And we've got these things: orient to view, keep readable, angle, change the angle to maybe 30 degrees, line spacing 5, cross hatch if we wanted. So we get different hatch patterns, but then this is no longer going to be ANSI 33, so we'd have to make sure that we change the name of that as well. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. So be careful what you do with these things, because these are sort of set within the sort of global settings, not just per view. And we can then say OK to that. So other additional settings, we've got line patterns. So not the line weights or the line styles. The line styles are made up of weights, patterns and color. So the line patterns themselves are just a series of dashes and dots, and if we wanted to make a new one, then we basically start setting sort of the type and then the value. So what that means is, if we look at one of these, it's like an interesting one, so this one here for example, and edit that, then we've got a dash, and 15 is the length, then we've got a space and the distance of the space, and then we've got another dash, another space, and a dash and a space. So these things are, and we've either got a dash or a dot, and then you've got a space. Okay, so you're going to get these alternating options. So if I create a new one, my line type, and I come in here, I've got to start with a dash or a dot. I got no option. I can't put a space in there. So I'll start with a dot, and then I've got to put a space in. I'll put another dot in, another space in. So I'll do an SOS line. So dot, 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 space, and then we go for dash, space, dash, space. And finally, it's painful to watch, I bet, dash. So this is SOS, dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. So I've just filled in these values as well. So I've got dot, can't have a value to it, space, that's 3, and then dots, and then I've got a dash at 6 mil. So let's say OK to that. You must have a space after every defined line segment. Okay, so again, after this one, let's put a space in, and that's going to be 3. And then we can say OK to that. So I've got my line type there, so that's SOS dot 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 dash dot dash dot dot dot, and we can say OK to that. And then if we go to our modify, no, let's do a line style first, so then we can use it. So line styles, let's cancel out of that, and we'll use for my new line style, we'll not have dash, we'll have my new line style as well, my line type. There you go. Okay, so let's change it to say 3, and then apply that and OK that. And then if we go back to our section view, so go to the plan, right click, go to view, then these have changed to our dot 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 dash 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 dot dot dot. So see how flexible this little system is. So the one more thing that I want to sort of look at our materials, and again, just to reiterate a few things that we've covered already with materials. These are the project materials, and then these things which are available under sort of this little dialog box are the materials that sit outside of the project but can be loaded in to the project. And we've got two folders, the Autodesk materials and then the AEC materials. Okay, so all of these things can be loaded in. If they're already loaded in, then it'll say they're already loaded in, but that one wasn't. And the main thing to be wary about with this are the graphics are going to show up in shaded mode. So mostly these things are set to this grey 120, 120, 120 colour. If you wanted to use render appearance on it, so let's go glass frosted, and I clicked on render appearance, it's going to give me that. So this is a transparency now, and then sort of a lighter colour to that. I don't have to then keep that ticked. I can untick it and it's going to retain that value. The surface pattern, again, all of these sorts of things can be adjusted, and this is a global adjustment as well. Let's remember. The appearance, this is the bits and pieces that we have to sort of get familiar with. This frosted white glass doesn't have any shared properties. Okay, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably got some thermal and physical ones. No, it doesn't. That's unusual. It might be that it's been changed somewhere, so let's find something else that's got shared properties. Let's go for concrete. That's going to have lots of shared properties. So the appearance on concrete and the physical properties, it's got 5 shared properties. Thermal, again, 5 shared properties. So what this means that if I decided to duplicate this material, for example, so we've got this color. So what often happens is that you'll duplicate this material. So I want a concrete, but I don't want it to look like this. I want it to look slightly different. So I've got my concrete. I want all the other properties to stay the same, physical and thermal. So I would right click on this one, concrete, and duplicate. So now I've got my number 1. And I'll call this red just to highlight the difference. So concrete, sand, cement, screed, red. So I want this to be a red colour. So notice now it's 6 sharing. So this is sharing with lots of other types of concrete. So I go to my appearance and I say, okay, it's sharing 3 at the moment, non-uniform warm grey. So 3 things are going to be sharing with this. So if I decided to change this colour to red, drop it down like that, and okay, that's going to update to red. But also all these ones here, these ones, these ones, and these ones have also changed. And this is what confuses a lot of people. Why has that changed? So I only want this one to change, the appearance, but it's because it's sharing with 3 other things. Let's hope then I can unshare this, but I think I've already gone too far and I've forgotten what the number was, but I'll try it anyway. If I unshare this, so I duplicate this asset, then with a bit of luck these would change. No, they haven't. So I've got to go Control Z to try and share this. No, I'll just cancel that, and hopefully if I go back into the materials, then my concrete is back where it was. Well, I've just loaded this back up and we've lost those materials, which is a good thing. However, I can't find the one that I was using before, so let's not worry about that too much. But anyway, concrete, cast in place C15. This is shared by 2 other things. And if I decided to change this, then it's going to update the other values as we saw. So if I right click and duplicate on this, we now get the 3, and I'll just call this red again. What I need to do is make sure that I duplicate the asset first. So if I duplicate the asset, it's going to basically take that asset, but it's now only going to be associated with this thing. And I can then call this non-uniform warm grey, non-uniform red. So I'm changing that, and I'm not going to necessarily change the information there, but I am now going to change the colour on this bit. So that's going to update that color there, and this one updates, but the other ones don't update because it's not sharing its assets anymore. The physical and thermal, they are absolutely fine. It can be as strong as everything else. I just want this to have a little red pigment to it. And then you've got other options like sealants. You can have an epoxy or acrylic sealant on it. That might give it a slightly different look. And we've got a bit of weathering, bump mapping if we wanted to increase that. I don't know whether we can increase the size of this so we can see it a bit better. There you go. So that's updating. So it's got a little sparkle on it now from the sealant. If I had none, then that's probably going to disappear. Yeah, like that. And we can just about see the bump as well. This is generated from this image. If I drag this up, then the bump's going to increase. So it's going to be bumpier. Tends not to affect it at the edges, but you can see a little bit of bump happening on there. That's a displacement map that would make that sort of really sort of change. This is just a filter that's put over it, so you end up with sort of shading and non-shaded elements, which gives the effect of a texture. And we can also put a tint into it, so we can lighten that up like so. So that's going to mix up those colors, so that versus this. So those are the sorts of options that you have with these colors. And then this is duplicated material. This can be used. It's going to give it the same sort of mass and weight readings in our structural analysis should we go down that route, but if you wanted purple concrete, then this would be the way to do it. So you apply that and OK that. So the main thing to be aware of there is that you've got to share the assets, otherwise it's going to overwrite lots of other settings. Okay, so that's a little refresher of the settings that we looked at. We have looked at other things like location and coordinates and position before. We really wouldn't sort of need to worry too much about these things for the purposes of this, but structural settings, MEP settings, these are all the load cases, combinations, analytical model settings, for example. The shared parameters, we haven't really played around with any of those apart from the material based assets, and then the project units. These are sorts of things to look at here. You've got common disciplines, you've got electrical would give us the illuminance sort of values. We were looking at that with somebody else the other day. So you know, all these unit settings are in there. Just don't think that you've only got one setting. You've got all these different ones that are looking at specific elements. Okay, so in the next bit I'll sort of get this back to looking normal, and then we'll have a look at how we can generate some nice looking details.